welcome back to another episode of To Customer Value and Beyond. It's been a while. We took our sweet time to prepare the next episode, and it was absolutely our fault, not our today's guest, who was very excited to join us here. We've been cooking up some exciting new episodes. We've been deciding to change the flow of the show a little bit, and are very excited and proud to have a very special guest today. So it's 5 p.m. in Berlin from where most of us are recording. It's 11 a.m. for Jim, who is in Boston. And I'm very proud to introduce our guest of today, who's Chief Revenue Officer at BookingKit. So Hans Christian, welcome to the stage.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to have you. And as usual, we also have Jim here with us as our fabulous co-host, who will keep it light and will keep me on my toes if I take too long to get to a point. So wonderful to have you. Hans Christian, maybe a few words about you. Who are you? What are you doing? And what's up?
So I'm at the moment CEO at BookingKit, Chief Revenue Officer. So I have all revenue focused parts of the organizations reporting into me: marketing, sales, success, and support. And I'm in this position at BookingKit since 5 years now. Which also means I joined during the first wave of COVID. And why is this so special? Because BookingKit is offering a booking system for providers of leisure activities. So that could be big zoos or museums and sites. And so during COVID, of course, this was a tough call. It was a very interesting time to join, or as we would say in our industry, it was a roller coaster ride, pun intended. Before that, I have been, and we're based in Berlin. I'm also having 2 kids here in Berlin in school. So I'm also a father beside being a CEO. And before joining BookingKit, I have been at a sales boutique for 4 years, where I have helped tech startups to build their first non-founder or post-founder led sales organizations that go to market, typically B2B and SaaS focused, and also a second group of customers. They were scale-ups that were entering the German market or were launching new products, innovative products, next or in parallel to their existing sales organization, go-to-market organization. And before that, I have been a founder myself for roughly 9 years and have built a couple of companies myself.
Wonderful. And you now having 5 years of experience as a Chief Revenue Officer, managing marketing, post-sales, and sales itself, you must probably be quite a bit of a unicorn in Germany yourself, because I haven't met many Chief Revenue Officers, and especially not with your breadth of experience. So yeah, great to have you, and we will be excited to learn a lot from you. And I've met you quite a bit through Berlin meetups and events already. So we already had some very exciting conversations. So I'm super honored to have you here today in your official capacity. So as maybe a bit of an icebreaker, right? So is there some kind of fun fact on your LinkedIn profile or in your CV that might not be apparent on first sight and something you might want to share?
Yeah, of course, it will be a fun fact that I don't want to share, but this is why it's that fun to share it. So the very first company that I founded myself turned into sort of an incubator in the, I would say, relatively early days of the Berlin startup scene, right? When there was a bit of lots of trying out. And we were, of course, one of the many companies that were trying their luck in many different ways. And we were launching some products on our own, but we were also helping other founders to build up their own idea and go to market. And one of the startups that I was co-creating at that time was a big vacuum cleaner. And if I say big, I mean in the size of a street construction machine. So it means through the technology you can dig out the ground, for example, for revisiting pipes or electricity lines or telecommunication cables without the risk of destructing anything, because that often happens, actually unexpectedly often or surprisingly often happens, that while you're revisiting one thing or want to fix one thing, you actually break something else and make it actually worse. And this is a machine that helps to avoid this. And yeah, that's one fun fact hidden somewhere in my LinkedIn profile.
Very impressive. Is that machine still working somewhere, or some kind
Yeah,
of
so
similar
the
machine?
company is not around anymore, but the machine is actually out there and it's doing its destruction-free job.
Nice. Yeah, I would have loved for the guys who worked on our street a few weeks ago to have that, because our water supply was gone for 2 days. So that might have helped, right? Very cool. So, and maybe that's a very cool fun fact. And maybe is there also something where, and it kind of already was, right? Something that doesn't necessarily have to do with tech. So maybe a skill that helped you also survive the roller coaster that BookingKit so far also has been for you.
Yeah, so I think sometimes the more gray hair you grow, I think, at least I am, but I guess also other people tend to reflect more on like what's actually what you do differently from others, or maybe also what do you particularly do worse or better than others. And I think something that I have identified for myself was being able to zoom out and zoom in very quickly on things. And for example, during the time at this agency, I might have been on 4 different projects during this day, right? And always had maybe 5 minutes to prepare and then be there to face a CEO or a head of sales or CSO and explain why things are not working typically. And I think this ability to be super fast there and at least being able to ask the right questions or guiding the conversation, that's something that I've I think learned over being a founder, but also being part of an agency. It's definitely something super helpful. And then I've seen it also, of course, being valuable in other, like also in my current job, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I think sometimes I have the feeling that, especially having a bit of a broader experience, right, and a broader having had broader touch points with the world and with different kind of use cases and areas, right, that sometimes helps also understanding your customer base, right? So it's usually
I'm
quite
definitely
helpful.
suffering from too many things that interest me, and I'm definitely too curious. So therefore, yes, this could be related.
Yeah, something I notice nowadays, is now being a founder myself, is that I've been wearing the customer hat for quite a long while. And now having have more holistic responsibility, it's quite helpful, right? To be this nagging customer that has so much demands and expects great service and great documentation and all that. It's quite helpful, but yeah, of course, we also still have to think there's other areas of the organization that have to support that and have to work hand in hand. And we have a bit of a theme today, right? So we want to work ourselves through the customer value topic, but we also identified certain areas where we thought you could share a lot for, especially. And that was the areas of internal AI playbooks, external AI playbooks, and later on we might look also a bit into the future on how to leverage that. And maybe looking at that AI technology or other technologies you might have had touch points with in the past, which probably were quite a few. What is usually a moment, or what was a specific moment where you realized that a certain technology might be or might have been a game changer for you and not just a hype?
I will go very way back now.
Love that.
Spreadsheets. Say spreadsheets.
And that is
Paper.
1996 or maybe
Spreadsheets.
1995, the first time that my dad connected our PC at home to the internet or to the
Wonderful.
predecessor
I hear the noise.
of the World Wide Web. And that's definitely this moment where you just instantly realize, okay, this is something very impactful, even though you at this point in time, I had no clue what it really means. And I would say, even if I would go back now, being more the person that I am, I would probably still have not anticipated everything that followed from this. But I would say this is this click moment where you know immediately, like, this is something that has an impact. And the question is more, why? Why is this so intuitive, right? That you understand this is actually something big. And maybe another time that I had this, however, to a lesser degree, was when I had my first, the first smartphone in my hand. So someone was traveled to the US and came back with the iPhone 1. Or I think it was just called the iPhone, not iPhone 1. But anyways, you know what I mean? So, and this was, I would say, definitely clear. This is something. However, it was not this like understanding of this is world changing, but definitely it was clear because phones were around before, right? And it was still clear, okay, this is not just the next evolutionary step. This is another level, and this might create new type of work or new type of interaction, even though for me at this time it was absolutely not clear in which ways. This also I would consider personal failure of not anticipating, despite some exposure to the internet revolution, right? So why not why not extrapolating this and like what kind of implications this might have? And then I would say on the other hand side, so I would say there's on the one hand side, this extremely big electrification or steam engine thing. This is what I would think I would compare the internet to. And then something more gradually below that, which I would compare, sorry, Steve Jobs, the iPhone to, or this type of application, but really making something super accessible that before was not very accessible. And then maybe on the opposite side, things that never really took off, even though they are around since a very long time, like VR, right? So VR is something that has always been announced as the next big thing, but always when I tried it out, I was thinking like, oh, that's really nice, but what will I do with it, right? I had never had a clue, right? What is really the thing besides that it's might be playful for half an hour, but beyond that, it didn't really get me.
Well, I remember when I first discovered the internet, Hans, and it was in college, and any research I did was on microfiche. Like I used to go to the library. Y'all know what microfiche is? It's like no, you don't? Okay. You don't know what it is?
Yes, of course I remember. Yes.
Yeah, you gotta they have these little news articles that were magnified under this device, and it was like this slide thing, and it was basically taking a book and looking it under like a magnifying glass, and that's how you did your research. And then I don't know if it was like junior or senior year, I went to the computer lab and someone showed me Yahoo, and I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. I'm like, wow, I can just copy this stuff on the internet and pass it in a paper. It was fantastic. The internet is great. But maybe speaking of technological advances and cheating, let's talk a little bit about AI. When we talk about addressable value or value in general, AI is there to help accelerate that. So time to value, especially like for internal processes, workflows. So maybe Hans, you can talk a little bit about like how are you using AI internally right now? Where are you seeing some actual significant tangible wins?
So yeah, I think this connects well with the question before. So because the thing is that I think where like I have, of course, since I first tried out the first Gen AI, like ChatGPT, probably like most of us, somewhere 2023, right? So okay, wow, this is, and I think then the understanding of wow, this is easy. So, and I think like if I compare these to the other things, right? So this was really easy. So that made me believe this is accessible. This could really be something become really big. But then the next thing that you experience is, oh, wow, this is really powerful. And why is it so powerful in my way? Because in my view, because it changes the way, of course, how we interact with computers. And it's not just about this, we can now type in stuff also, right? I think the interesting thing for me is, when I think about it, is typically what most users struggle with when they want a computer or a machine or a code to do what they want is to figure out what the code or the machine wants from them in order to do the stuff that they want from the machine. Maybe then only to figure out, that's the wrong machine. It doesn't deliver what I want, right? And I think the great thing about AI is that it allows us to enter unclear content or unclear information and still produce something useful out of it. Sometimes also something unuseful, but you don't have to be 100% precise to get going. And I think this is just a lot more human, right? So often I think not just in interaction with computers, but also in our teams, right? When we are in a meeting and people talk to each other, you sometimes see that one person talks about a different thing than the other person, but they have the feeling they actually have a conversation, but in fact, they talk about two different things. But somehow we as humans are quite used to dealing with non-clear briefings. Of course, sometimes this produces big problems, right? We develop the wrong products, we misunderstand each other constantly and so on, but we are extremely good at dealing with insufficient information and making something useful out of it. And so when we are now talking about internal applications, so for me, I would say the interesting question is, what should we not do internally with AI-based applications? And I would say right now, for me, the rule of thumb would be everything that deemed super tough in the old world, this is now potentially something that we should look into in the AI world. And just to give a super simple example, we have a certain email inbox that no one really looks into. And we recently figured this out.
How nice for the people
I will not
to
disclose
them.
which of our email inboxes this is.
Email us shove it around. We won't even
but it's one that you
acknowledge
would
your
expect
email.
someone looks into this regularly. And so why are people not doing this? Because they feel like, oh, each specific email has a very low value to me, right? But of course, 5% of these emails have an extremely high value. Just you actually have to humanly screen all of the 100 to figure out which are the 5 that actually have value. So it creates the incentive of not doing anything, but then in case something really explodes in your face, then you think like, why did never ever anyone bother to look into this email inbox? Because of course, if you just have the 5 cases in mind that have value, then it's totally clear. But this is, I would say, a dilemma, right? You can't hardly afford to always have a person just screening a lot of these scam and spam and whatever there just to find the truffles. At the same time, you don't want to miss out on the truffles. And I think this is something in the traditional world that would have required a lot of if and when conditions. And even then, it would have been really hard to figure out all the edge cases and all the right keywords and all the static, deterministic rules, right, in order to capture and separate the wheat from the chaff. And I would say with AI, something like this, a relatively unspecific input and filtering out the stuff that you're looking for, and it's good enough if this is a 80%, 90% accuracy, right? That's still good enough if you're just missing out on 10%, but not 100% of the valuable content there. This is, I would say, a perfect exercise for an internal job. And I think this is one of the areas that I'm looking into, not just the big projects, we can talk about this as well, but also small jobs to be done that typically put the team either in a big dilemma of spending a lot of resources or missing out, or that suck up just a lot of the available team resources on relatively low value work. And this, for me, one area that you have to go through, jobs to be done, right? What is it, what we should do or are doing, and what we perhaps should not do anymore. And why have we never assigned this to a computer? Because it was very hard in the past, right? Because and this is what I would call fuzzy input. You don't have clear input, you have fuzzy input, and therefore in the old world it was super hard to capture this. In the new world, this might be possible, but you have to accept, and we will probably talk about this later, also live with fuzzy output. You will not get 100% accuracy on the output side. You have to be able to accept that there might be also, due to the unclear input, also sometimes unclear output.
Yeah, it's interesting you had a use case. One of the things I did just recently, like over the past couple of days, is we have like a shared inbox, and we're looking at the emails, right? We actually read them and respond to them.
Oh,
So
you're looking into that, right?
Yeah, we're ahead of the game compared to you guys, Hans. But one of the things I want to get a sense of, like, how do I staff for this? Or how can I even maybe implement some kind of like bot if there's a kind of like simple questions being asked, then maybe we don't need a human, or maybe we can answer 80% of these things by a bot, and then focus on the more complex stuff. So we exported it, and I don't know how to do this like in Gmail. So like I exported it. So I had like a list of all the emails, scrubbed it for all the PII, and then we just did like a script where you could look for certain keywords so we can categorize them. And anything where it wasn't able to categorize in the script based on the keywords we built that made sense for that inbox's use case, we sent it to OpenAI's API, right? So we could, because it was like thousands and thousands of records. So we gave it a prompt saying like something to the tune of, hey, can you take a look at these and classify them into like, are they onboarding? Are they product related? Is it renewal related? And try to get a sense of whether it's simple, moderate, or complex. And what came back is like most of this stuff is just really simple type of queries relating to like renewals, relating to some kind of product questions and onboarding, and a lot of that can probably be handled by like FAQs or be handled by a bot. So yeah, just interesting, because it was the timing of what you said, because we just recently did that at my current job.
Yeah, and I think if you think of it like just in terms of small companies, right, there's a lot of these smaller tasks that just have to be done in the scale of, let's say, 1 to 50 or so, right? And you will never get to everything. And I think it's a nice setup already to think of what are the jobs that just suck up a lot of the energy and that also occasionally create value, but that don't really require a human. And then I think on the other side, there are more the big obvious topics. So that means shifting not just simple or particular tasks, but entire work objects into AI-based models, where I would say typically we don't see pure AI, but a combination of rule-based, traditional, augmented or AI-augmented software, right? But that, in my view, for example, in customer success helps us to monitor customer health more holistically, because like also in the old world, right? Remember CRMs? Then we have a mix of properties with defined lists and so on, with clearly defined values, or free text, right? And in the old world, we always hated free text, because what can you do with free text, right? Nobody will ever look at this. You cannot analyze it. You cannot make any statistics from it. You cannot build any rules like automations based on this, right? And now suddenly a list-based field that has only 6 values to choose from might be less valuable and less informative than a free text field where we actually fill in the actual summary, for example, of the conversation. And that summary might be itself AI-based. So it didn't even require our success manager or sales manager to actually type that down, but the information is there, the actual qualitative information. And we don't have to, like at least in all cases, we don't really have to put it into the narrow boxes that we used to wanted to force the information into, right? To be able to do anything with it at all. And this is where I would say this is one of the bigger paradigm shifts maybe in the internal work.
So what would you then maybe say, since you mentioned the unstructured data, right? And when Jim and I were also in the past working with shared customers, we oftentimes had the topic of process understanding, data structure, right? What needs to be there to kind of make proceed, right? To really make steps forward. And with AI, you oftentimes have a similar conversation, right? How much of your process do you need to understand? How much of your data does need to be first available, and second, hopefully in a type of form that you can actually make use of. What would you think, especially looking at AI and internal use cases of that? How critical is that to get order into process and data, specifically that you also mentioned that unstructured now is possible in a way?
So unstructured, but in a designed way unstructured. So I would not say just a big data pool, throw it to the AI and hope it will somehow magically find out what's relevant of this and what's outdated and whatnot.
One day.
So I would say at the moment where I see these tools is they pretty much depend on quite clean data. And I expect that this will reduce over time because I think these models will be trained on getting better at ignoring probably irrelevant information on the same heuristics that we would do as humans as well. So for example, an old active Confluence page is probably less relevant than a new Confluence page that's active if it has similar content and just the metadata show the one page is much more recent than the other page. So probably this means one of the content is more trustworthy than the other. However, I think AI will force us, just as the introduction of any new software layer on top of the Excel sheet software layer and then higher up, to get better at data hygiene, right? And to force ourselves to also pre-structure the data, even if it's unstructured by itself, but structure where it is, right? Where the output of the conversation ends up as an input in the CRM, and then where the AI again, that is because we all know that for AI context matters. So just any field in any qualitative unstructured content will not work for the AI. You have to put this into specific context so the AI can then really extract the information from this in a meaningful way to make it specific. So if you have a long conversation, 60 minutes with a customer or with a prospect, it's probably good if the AI already compartmentalizes the qualitative data into this is a potential upsell, this is a feature request, this is a feedback about the current product, this is quality feedback to how the team is dealing with the customer and so on, right? And to basically have the entire information content done, then to spread it into different fields in the CRM, and then the AI that runs across the CRM field then knows this is specific information regarding product feedback. So this I will deliver then to product, rather than you just have a big unstructured data where you have a lot of maybe some hits, but also a lot of wrong false positives, right? So where the AI then imagines it might be relevant, but in case it isn't. And I think this will be the interesting challenge for big companies, right? Because as we all know, the bigger and bigger the companies are, the bigger are the data centers and the lot more data debt they have, right? And outdated data or in unstructured data, and also in not centralized data. And to which degree are you then able to leverage AI even in order to really extract the value? However, to end this part on a good note, I would also say I would foresee a rise of AI tools focused specifically on cleaning up old and outdated data centers and data dumps to make them AI ready. Because I think there's no other way around for large companies, right? Or they will miss out on the AI paradigm shift altogether.
That makes a lot of sense. And especially you don't want them to find all the old documents that were deprecated that you still have flying around everywhere and cite them, right? So we want to get rid of that.
And cite them as the truth, because if the team hears it from the AI, this has to be the true information. So we will not doubt it, right? So that's even more dangerous than having no information.
Very true. So switching perspectives a bit, right? Now we basically managed to do this, right? We're happy with our progress. We tried out AI internally. We looked at process, we looked at data, and somehow got a bit of a hold on all of that. Now we actually found a use case. Now we make it customer focused, right? So now we are brave. We want to do external AI, right? So we want to go out with it in whatever shape or form we want to do that. So How would you, maybe with an example, how would you then say external or customer-facing AI, right? And I would say that doesn't need to be LLM, that doesn't need to be voice or chat, right? Customer-facing can be a lot of things. How would that be then different from the internal AI use cases we just discussed?
So I think for the, so I would say this depends a bit on the company size. So I think startups actually can do, like small startups can, perhaps even should do both at the same time. Or perhaps they even AI first from how they are designing their product, right? Then the question is not even there how they would get started. This is basically the assumption on which they are starting. And then there's the big corporations, which I think will have perhaps even an easier time of rolling out AI features in their applications compared to internally. But I will talk, because this is not my area of expertise, specifically the big ones, I will talk about the mid-sized companies and how I see it for us as a second mover, because we're not an AI first company. We are having made the decision of moving in this direction, that we really want to embrace it, both internally as well as externally. And there, for us, I think the decision has been to first adopt internally, to understand better of what are the limitations and what are the benefits, and to give everyone a good feeling, be it from customer support to product to finance. So let's really go out and start embracing ourselves internally wherever we see something that might make sense. And then on top of that, let's see where it could create value. For this, we have, I would say, followed the typical playbook of talking to our customers, generating some ideas, talking to our customers and see what topics resonate. Where is AI not just purely a fancy thing, but where does it really create value? And I think this is a pitfall that you might easily might fall into, because there's just so many, the potential is just so big, or the stuff that you can go so wide with this, right? The risk that you're in the end building something that doesn't really create value and impact is something that I think, especially us as companies that are transitioning into this AI field rather than starting from there, really have to be mindful. Not that we are neglecting the value that we're creating with our current product for customers, and instead just creating something fancy and divert resources from where they actually create value. So first step, trying out internally, getting familiar, understanding limitations and opportunities. Also, I think it's about freeing your thinking out of the old world, right? To imagine new things that just didn't used to be possible, in order to suggest to customers as ideas, not something that is just the next small iteration of your existing product, just the augmentation, but that you sometimes might actually skip a development that you would have actually done internally traditionally, and you rather go AI first. And I will give you an example. For us, we don't at the moment have a great reporting function, but we have shifted in our customer focus to larger and larger customers that we are catering the product to. And of course, for our previous customer focus a couple of years back, reporting didn't matter so much. But of course, for large customers, for large organizations, reporting matters a lot. However, we also know that each of our customers has quite specific reporting needs. So the question is, should we really build a reporting function that just some customers like and some probably dislike or hate, because it doesn't really deliver what they are looking for? And perhaps we will rather look into building a function where you can actually customize your own report based on your individual needs, right? And that's not something that we have delivered. I'm just giving this as an example that came up there. Like, why should we even build this reporting function where we already know about the limitations that we're going to hit? Why don't we just leap forward and we skip this step and we just build it AI first and leverage the opportunities that AI gives us, basically, right? And it's just only one example, right? So I think the third takeaway for me would be, don't limit yourself to just like what you have in place, but really try to think one or two steps ahead and think of what has been impossible in the past. Is that perhaps possible now based on this new paradigm? And so this is what we're looking into. And that's actually not just like I would say the first wave of AI was this summarizing functions, right? So I have a long text and now the application helps me to summarize it or lets me send in a summary per email. The next layer that we're seeing at the moment, I would say, is the AI is actually being a conversation partner. So for example, it's a co-pilot. It helps to do certain human tasks better. And the next step I think that we're going to see is that the AI will take over certain tasks on the user's behalf, be it fully automated or be it human in the loop. But I think this is the next step that we are going, and that is also something that we are looking into building at the moment.
Yeah, Hans, you said something. So you said something interesting. You mentioned like reporting as specific to your company and, making improvements there. And also, this concept of a co-pilot, which is the common kind of phraseology used with AI that's kind of helping you out perform some kind of task. So, like, do you have examples, or what have you seen? Because here's what I struggle with, because you mentioned reporting, is like this idea of like, hey, we're going to build this dashboard. I'm going to have these dashboards out there. And my eyes roll to the back of my head when I hear that, because, there's all these dashboards. Whether or not we can make sense of them is another thing if they're actually in human readable format. So what I keep telling people is like, I don't need dashboards. I need insights. And I need insights in the context based on what I'm doing at the moment, whatever workflow that is. So I don't know, like when you talk about whether it's internal or external, do you have examples, or what have you seen where you have the ability to go leverage AI as a co-pilot to surface insights in some kind of like natural language processing where, you can get those answers as part of that workflow? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me try to answer, and then you ask a
Yeah.
follow-up if I didn't make sense. So I would say the co-pilot thing is something that I would see, for example, in HubSpot. I'm building a report, and then I let the AI summarize it, what it sees there, and then I can optimize it. And that's a great feature, because typically people are not annotating reports, and then you have a lot of reports and nobody has a clue of what the report is supposed to show. So therefore, I think it's a great augmentation of summarizing, right? And then there's the other co-pilot in HubSpot where help me build a report. But in the end, you as the human are building the report or the dashboard, and the AI is guiding you through the different help pages in HubSpot. And when I said we are building a function there, we are thinking actually about the next step of there is no report and the AI doesn't help me to build anything. I have a question, and I will just copy the pitch that you just made. This is exactly the pitch
I don't want to
that we're
build
going to be
it.
using. In the end, you have a question, you want to have the answer to your question, or maybe the follow-up question to this, right? And therefore, you're not building a dashboard, you're basically talking to your data. And we call this then chatting with your data. This is basically the idea. And I think
That's
this
what
is
I
the only
love.
way also to reach true customization, right, of insights, because that's the only way how users get probably the stuff that they're actually looking for, instead of fiddling around with settings and filters and so on.
I know you have a question, Stephen, just to follow up to that. I would rather spend 20 minutes talking to a chat bot to get to the answer I want and have a back and forth conversation than have it kind of co-pilot help me build a dashboard that's kind of just going to sit there and somebody has to go to. Like that's where I would rather spend my time, and that's where a lot of my time is spent. Maybe and it kind of cuts both ways. It might be sad and dystopian that I have more conversations with the bot these days than I do with humans. But anyway, you're not my therapist, so I'm not going to talk about that. Stephen, I know you have a question.
This is the follow-up session, Jim. We do this in the follow-up session.
But maybe let's add a third dimension, right? You mentioned the human factor, right? So the human element, let's add that. There might be the third option, right? There might be a co-pilot, there might be this AI voice that I can talk to, but where would maybe be use cases where you would say, okay, this needs to remain human, right? So I want this to be a person Jim can talk to, right? And really open up to. Not just for therapy, right? So also business.
Yeah, I get. So I think still this therapy, or let's say socializing aspect, is a super relevant one. And I think just as with remote, right? So all of us also have realized, right, how important social interaction is, and how great it is to meet in a meetup in Berlin, for example, Stephen. So therefore, I think that might even become more relevant, that more time of a company or an organization is then spent on quality time with each other, actually having a conversation and learning from each other, instead of just sending quick tasks to each other, right? So maybe it's more like what we're talking about will change, but it doesn't, I would say, necessarily mean that will be talking less, but for sure the content of our conversations might change. So I think decisions is something that for quite some time will remain in the authority of humans, and also, like, even if we go to the step where we allow automations to execute certain decisions, we as humans will set the scope of this, right? We will set the limitations of what are you allowed to do without my involvement, and where do you need to involve me. And therefore, I think I think we can pretty straightforward compare it to the textile manufacturing of the 19th century, right? So in the 19th century, actual people were knitting and weaving, and then 100 years later, you have people steering the machines. But like, factories are still full with humans. It's still not that you have factories where there's just machines running machines. Apparently, also after 100 years further, humans are still better at running machines than machines are at running machines. So, and therefore, I would say that's probably exactly where we are also heading for white collar tasks, right? So that don't involve hardware, but software. And so I think our type of expertise will change, right? From executing the task itself more to the meta level of where we are defining the task. And I think sometimes, if I look at how we are working at this organization or previous organizations, it would have been actually great to think more of what we are doing instead of just doing, because sometimes I have the feeling we're just heading forward, we're just doing stuff because we don't have time executing stuff to think of what we are executing or what we should be executing. And so I hope, at least, that my positive imagination of the future would be AI will allow us to think a bit more of what we're actually wanting to do, and defining our problems better, and thereby also defining our solutions better. And that would be my, like, the positive outlook for where we are heading.
And somebody needs to supervise the bots, right? And I have a really positive example. I recently visited an in-person event of one of these AI first companies that popped up, very successful one. And it was so impressive to see that small team already doing exactly what you just said. Now thinking about what will I need 3 steps into the future. And being a very small company, they already did like all the SOC 2, DIN, whatever certifications. They have all that in place, right? Thought of process, what will I need further down the road, which was very impressive, because AI allowed them to not hustle as much as probably many of us did 5-10 years ago in SaaS, but really think about, okay, this can actually be hustled by the AI. So let me look at the process and look into the future. And maybe, since we're talking about like use case and benefits, if I would be like a tour operator, right? Somebody that has a small business and is looking at this AI thing and thinks, I'm not sure if that's for me, right? So what would maybe be a short, convincing argument where you would say, well, it probably is?
So I think most of our customers are no extremely huge organizations, right? So they have a couple of tens of employees, the very big ones maybe a few hundred. And so typically there's always a shortage of time. They never get to do anything that they would like to do. And I think this is now a great chance of getting certain stuff done without being in this dilemma of hiring more people, which they can't afford, or not doing the things that they should do. And so I would say typical areas is everyone has an area of expertise, right? Sometimes it's more about marketing, sometimes it's more about sales, sometimes it's more about the operations side. And I think the first thing that you should already do today basically is leverage AI to compensate the stuff that you're not good at. And before you just jump in and let the AI do stuff, I think the first thing is to do a self-assessment. Basically like, hey, let's set up a great set, like let's create or design a great setup for an organization like mine. If I'm a tour operator, what functions does a successful tour operator need, right? Let's build this together in a conversation with a Gen AI. And then next step would be, what are the skills that I'm great at, that probably no AI will soon be better than I am, and which are the skills that our team is not great at? So what could we perhaps compensate through using AI tools? And thereby then building a more complete organization. And if I'm great at operations, perhaps AI can help me get much better on marketing and can help fill me blind spots, gaps that we are having in our organization. And I think then from there on, once you have made these steps, you will start rewiring your brain, right? Really being able then, after doing the manageable first steps, to think much more ahead, going these 2-3 steps forward, because you have already familiarized yourself with what these tools can do. And but I think it's better to start small, where you are at the moment, rather than to think super far ahead and then being frustrated because the AI just doesn't deliver immediately what you expected it to deliver, right? So I think it's better to go this tentative first steps to really learn to become AI educated, and then to increase the size of the steps.
So
that makes
So
sense.
Hans, you mentioned you mentioned not looking too far ahead, but let's take a moment to do that anyway. So if you look, I don't know, call it 5 years, I don't know, sometime in the near future, what would you say, like, what role or skill becomes essential in an AI-driven company, and what should people be learning now so they can prepare themselves for that future state?
So one big thing I would say is education. So all of us, if we're in a company that has decided to go that step, and we are, for example, every person on the team needs to be literate about what AI is, how does it work, what are its limitations, and how can I make use of it. And I think part of that curriculum will be what is the right problem for a AI software or an AI tool, and what is the right problem for deterministic software. So do I have a defined problem and do I expect a defined outcome, or do I have a fuzzy problem and can I live with a fuzzy output? Is 80% enough, right? Because it's better than 0% or 10%, or do I require to have it 100% right all the time, right? Then if I'm going into a path of like employing AI, I need to be good at defining problems. And this is something that we as humans, I would say, I would compare this to Stephen's data issue, right? I would see this problem of being good at defining problems where is as big as the data thing. So even if we had the greatest data and the best processes, we still need to become really good at defining the right problem, or the problem in the best or right way, in order to get to the output that we're looking for. So this would be a second step. So first, identifying the right problems, then being good at describing the right problems and the desired outcomes. So things like definitions of done, KPI that needs to be achieved, right? Having an objective problem description and status description and stuff like this. So this needs to be trained. And I think the danger is then AI is super accessible. So we tend to just jump on it, or as companies, we may tend to just throw it at employees and just say, hey, deal with it. But in fact, people might then disengage, right? 10, 15%, 20% of the workforce might embrace it and might run with it. But there's a risk that 80% opt out and basically say, I tried it, it didn't work, I'm out of the game. So I think this is really important to keep people engaged and show them how they can be successful. And the other thing is, in the outside world, not every problem that we want to solve on behalf of our customers is a problem that we can solve best with AI, or perhaps even a problem that we should solve at all, because AI makes us much faster, perhaps in coding. So perhaps we are now building 100 new features, but perhaps this will screw up the usability of our product, right? So just the availability, or just that I can do it, doesn't mean I have to do it. And so it means also we have to get better at asking for value, because the past that had these hard limitations, the scarcity of the development resources, in the best way, ideally, forced us to make the right choices and to prioritize the most valuable things that we should build. And if now we are lowering the cost of doing stuff by a lot, maybe we are just also doing a lot of wrong stuff, right? We're not just scaling up the good stuff that we're doing, we might also scale the bad stuff that we're doing. And I think this is the third thing, that we need to become more educated as higher organizations to still ask the same questions, right? Addressable value. What is the stuff that we want to deliver, and not just features?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Is, even though you can potentially do more and do stuff faster, there needs to be some self-editing, right, and some vigilance around that. And I think what it can do, like there's always kind of, it cuts both ways. So I can do more, I can do it faster, but okay, what are you actually focused on, and are you actually producing quality? Yeah, those are good insights. And anybody I know some folks, you mentioned, getting started and then dismissing it. Even though I'm not always looking for the right answer, and this is where, if anybody's looking to get started, just start having conversations. Like, even it'll spark ideas. So it might not be that you get the exact answer, but I find it so helpful just for like simple brainstorming, like to get ideas out of my head, start putting premises down, where I don't have the benefit of being, in a synchronous conversation and maybe putting sticky notes on a board or going through those brainstorming exercises or mind mapping. Like, that's my mind mapping, that's my brainstorming, and it's a great way to get started in terms of solving problems, whether the solutions come from AI or just some ideas, and then you take the solutions forward. But yeah, self-editing.
And I think this falls into the small improvement stuff, right? That is super, super useful. It's like a couple of the most powerful things that I like to do is just asking questions of, here's my problem, here's what I intend to do, what are my potential blind spots? Because that's stuff that I don't see anyways, right? And I also don't always want to pull in someone from my colleagues to just help me with my stuff. And that's therefore a great thing to discover blind spots. Here's a briefing to my team. What is missing to make it a really good briefing for them, right? It's this team, this is their task, here's my briefing. What is missing in this briefing that would make it a complete briefing? So blind spot analysis and just sparing of ideas, I think, is a super good use case for everyone, right? And it's also one where you can't produce wrong or frustrating results, right? It will always be useful in whatever way.
Hans Christian, another great answer. And I think we need to get you back for a second or a follow-up episode, because I think we have so many more topics we could dive into, especially the whole customer value topic. We could probably talk for another hour. I have a very, very quick last question. And the only correct answers and possible answers are morning or late afternoon. If I'm planning a meetup for senior managers and executives, what would you prefer?
Late afternoon.
Thank you for that. You just confirmed an argument I have with someone else. Thank you so much. So if you're listening out there, late afternoon it is. Cool. Hans Christian, thank you so much for joining. As I said, our initial plan to host a weekly show is tough if you want to get super exciting guests to this show. So took us a while to get back on track. Thanks, Hans Christian, so much for joining. We will be announcing our next guest very soon because, as you can imagine, we're still trying to get it into our schedules. So once we have that done, we will announce it. And until then, thanks to you both. Have a good evening. And remember, the journey to customer value never ends. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.